Zambia has, in terms of the economic split, has the mining sector, which now I think accounts for about 16-17%. It's got the manufacturing sector, which is very, very small at slightly below 7%. And then we've got the agriculture, forestry and fisheries, also at about 7%. And the major sector, which is commerce, trade and commerce at about 25%. And tourism also sitting at a very, very low percentage, just around 5%. Now, in all these sectors that I've mentioned, there's quite a lot of potential. The simple example that I can give you is when you look at manufacturing sector sitting at 7% and commerce and trade sitting at about 25%, which actually shows you that Zambia's consumption potential is not being satisfied by the local production capacity, meaning that in the manufacturing sector there's quite a lot of potential to grow. Now, all those sectors are serviced by the energy sector, electricity. And in Zambia, like I said in my speech, we've got about 6,000 megawatts of electricity that we can generate from hydro power, and we've only actualized about 2,300. We have some challenges there in terms of weather patterns and also just management of our Kariba water body. We complain now that because of drought, we haven't had the ability to generate as much electricity as we should have done. Although a few years ago, we released quite a lot of water out of the Kariba Dam, and nobody talks about that. We also have quite some core deposits, and the good thing about the core deposits that we have is that in terms of electricity generation, you would actually not call it dirty energy, in the sense that we have about 30% very good quality coal and 70% poor quality coal, and we don't have much to do with it. And if we just leave it, it starts spontaneous fires. And what we've done with one of our investors is actually to create a coal-fired thermal power plant, which uses the 70% waste, which if they didn't do it would actually become an environmental hazard. So that's the one they use to burn and generate electricity. So in short, I should say, in all the sectors in Zambia, mining sector, everywhere, there's a lot of potential. But the energy sector is the one that would really want a lot of people to come and invest in, because that's what will underwrite the capability of other industries to come on board.
Perhaps maybe I could turn even now to the financiers, the DBSA, IDC, when it comes to looking at the region and looking like countries like Zambia. We see what their need is. Where do you see your financing going? Let me start with you, Mr. I'm nervous to say his surname because somebody wrote it down for me. Nochulwan. Yeah.
As a development bank of Southern Africa, in fact, we have been doing work in Zambia for the past 20 years. It has been one of the countries that were flagships for the DBSA when we were expanding into the region of Southern Africa. We have done a range of projects in the sectors in which we work in infrastructure, specifically around energy. We collaborated with the Chinese in the development of the Kariba North Power Station. We have, in the past few years, looked at a number of projects in the renewable energy space. We are looking at the opportunities in the vast resources in hydro that Zambia has. And We have also did some financing in other sectors like ICT, Zambia telecoms. We have done roads projects in Zambia. We are looking for opportunities to expand our presence in Zambia. Precisely because, as stated in the presentation by the shareholder DTI, because of the economic and political ties that we have with the country, as well as with the opportunities that we see emerging in the entire region of Southern Africa, where Zambia is a key player, a key market for us to do that work.
From the IDC perspective now, the IDC's core function is really to facilitate industrial capacity. That's really our core focus. And our mandate extends to the entire continent. And our focus really, in terms of, you asked the question about regional integration, and that's been a core theme of today's discussions as well, is really around value chains. And somebody raised this point a little bit earlier on about, how do we connect countries, not only politically, but how do we connect them economically? And from our perspective, the best way is to really look at it at the sectors from a value chain point of view. So and the simple questions are, what is South Africa good at? What is Zambia good at? What is Malawi good at? Etc., etc. Take the sector and then see what fits within those countries, given their specific, competitive advantage. And that's really what we've structured our financing around. So when we look at Zambia, we look at Zambia with a specific eye. In terms of, I think first thing for us is about achieving a win-win situation. And there's a lot of talk about this. Both countries have to benefit. I think the days of a one-sided business relationship, in my opinion, is actually the past. I don't think any business can sustain itself. Any business, even if it's a South African business going into Zambia, I don't think it's a viable option for that business to be acting as a South African business in Zimbabwe, in Zambia. Sorry, it's got to be a mass mart Zambia. It's got to be, no matter what business you're in, you've got to partner with a local business. So ultimately, just to get back to the point, ultimately what we're trying to achieve is that win-win situation. Right? So, and that's been our approach to regional integration. And from a project point of view, from a real point of view, we, for example, I'm going to use the example of copper because it's so relevant for Zambia. When we look at copper, we have to see, so the first question, what's in it for South Africa? Right? And it's very simple. Look, we have a generation, a power generation. The whole region has a power generation issue at the moment. But one thing that we maybe haven't thought of is when you generate power, you also have to distribute it. And to distribute it, you need cable. And to do cable, you need copper. So that's the one from a South African point of view. Similarly, Zambia has its own national development objectives. And we have to take cognizance of it. So Zambia wants to beneficiate more products. Now, our view is that you try and match those two skills up and you develop a project. So you develop a mine in Zambia, but you also put the smelter there, because South Africa doesn't necessarily want to or even can put a smelter up within the borders. So it's just what makes sense for the countries, and I think if we start thinking along those lines, we actually start getting projects that work firstly, that are commercially viable. We are DFI, and our real focus is about two things. It's about economic return, number one, and number two, equally as important, is the developmental return. And I think that the only way you're going to achieve sustainable development is really by adopting this kind of what are you good at and what am I good at, and let's stick to that and then create some value and development out of that. Thanks.
We've got the FMO. You're also a development bank as well, a Dutch one. What are you doing in Africa? And infrastructure is kind of more your space, isn't it? Tell us about your Zambian experience, and if people want to get involved in this space, what are you looking for?
Thank you, Chair. And let me start. I'd like to start with mirroring the comments of the Honourable Minister that he made this morning about the hospitality that he experienced while he was working and living part of his professional career here in South Africa. I mean, I'm here today from the Netherlands representing the Dutch Development Bank, FMO, having lived and worked in South Africa for close to 5 years now, and really enjoyed the hospitality and the warmth of the South African people and the nation very much in those past years. Moving on to Zambia, I must say it's a close call in terms of everybody I think is familiar with the ranking in terms of the World Bank ranking, I believe, in terms of ease of doing business. I think what we should do is also make a ranking in terms of pleasure of doing business. And I think in that sense, South Africa, and from my own experience, from FMO's experience, I can tell you that South Africa and Zambia are in a very close call. I'm not going to say who's ahead or who's leading, but maybe in some private conversations later on we can delve into that. No, I think for FMO, Zambia is one of the key countries in the region. So we have an office here in Johannesburg for Southern Africa, from which we cover the SADC region. And South Africa and Zambia are both very high on our list of countries that we invest in. What have we done so far as FMO? FMO is the Dutch Development Bank, focusing on the development of the private sector. So we focus on privately owned businesses in a number of markets: energy, infrastructure, financial sector, manufacturing, and also partially agriculture. As of today, our total investment portfolio in Zambia stands at close to $130 million. And that has increased quite significantly over the past 4 or 5 years. So that is in itself a proof that the way Zambia is positioning itself and the way Zambia is viewed upon, at least by my organization, is quite positive. As a development financing institution, like I said, focusing on private sector, within Zambia we have done transactions and invested in the energy sector, as long as it's privately operated and owned. So we have financed a number of projects and companies operating in that space. We're quite actively involved in the financial sector in Zambia, so providing credit lines to financial institutions in Zambia, long-term credit lines that they can then utilize on lend to businesses in Zambia. And increasingly, and that's I think also a nice match with Zambia's development plans, we are focusing and targeting the agricultural space. We definitely see the agricultural potential of the country, and we support, let's say, the policies of the government to diversify its economy, let's say, away from some of the main sectors at the moment. As we've seen in the past few years, of course, those sectors have been very beneficial, but it makes Zambia also very volatile or dependent on how, for instance, copper prices develop, etc., etc. So we are making a big effort in getting more involved in the agricultural space in Zambia.
Okay, again, we're going to explore quite a bit of this because this is the good side of the story, and I love good stories. But there is always the challenging side, and energy, Mr. Chikwanda, is a nightmare. I mean, we don't want to use the word crisis, but some people might describe it as that. And if I want to do business in Zambia, I've got to be assured of a certain amount of energy. I can't be worried about blackouts. How serious is the issue, and how far are we down the line in dealing with the energy? We're talking about investment here, but in the interim, there's businesses here that want to come and invest in Zambia. Can you help them, or must they wait until you sort your energy problems out?
Thank you so much, Program Director. First and foremost, the energy sector is very broad. We're talking of the electricity subsector and the petroleum subsector. In terms of the challenges that we're facing as a country, problems that the sub-Sahara continent is also facing, and we can contextualize them in terms of what we call the trilemma, the energy trilemma. Now, we know that in the meantime, we need energy. And part of the solution is to look for systems that you can deploy urgently. And as a forum, we are aware that there is a lot of technologies that are on the market, such as the ones that are based on hydrokinetic. We have always believed that to generate hydroelectric power, you need a river. To a larger extent you do, but in a real sense what you need is actually water and not necessarily a river. And water, rivers are not the only sources of water. So we have seen some systems which are called portable hydroelectric power plants, where you can come up with a reservoir, like maybe 1 million tank farm, and you load it with water and couple it with certain systems. So those you can deploy very rapidly within a month or 2 months. Solar you can deploy. There are other systems that are based on the hydromagnetic systems. That's within 2 months you can deploy. And co-locate with a client of your choice. You don't have to pester the utility company to join into their transmission and things like that. You can identify a client and co-locate that with them. We've got opportunities around the bioenergy systems. Those are quicker technologies that you can deploy. Waste to energy. There is so much garbage around Africa, and those can easily be converted. So those opportunities are available, and as an interim, focus point, even whilst you are trying to focus on other bigger things. But I'll talk about the petroleum subsector later. Sure.
Okay. But it doesn't take 5 seconds for people to go on the internet, Google, and look things up. And they'll come across articles like this where it says, for one, there's a chronic lack of commitment to project timeframes, a result of political interference and the involvement of narrow interests across successive Zambian governments. They're talking about the energy sector. For example, the 750 megawatt Kafue Gorge Lower Hydroelectric Project has been on the table since the first administration of President Frederick Chiluba. Is there enough political will? Is there something different about this administration? Because we can chat like this, but if someone's going to read this, they're going to say, Peter, you guys are having a laugh because this is not what we're reading.
Well, running a government is a very, very complex undertaking. And when you look at politics, in Africa, we're really not using politics to take ourselves to different levels. We actually use it to frustrate things, access to state resources, and that kind of stuff. I'll give you a simple example. We've had the Mamba Collieries thermal plant. For about a year, it was delayed for no apparent reason at all, other than some civil servants who belong to a particular political party. They do not want that project to take off during the term of this political party so that people can come and kick this political party out. So you find that those civil servants simply sit on files, and files don't move. Lack of planning also, working in silos. The left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing has also been part of our challenges. The Mamba Collieries thermal power plant has come on board now. We fought and managed to make sure that the project was moving. And when it moved, and it produced the first 150 megawatts of power, we were able to evacuate that power. But when it came to the next 150 megawatts of power, to bring the total to 300. We are unable to evacuate it. Why? Because our utility company, the equivalent of ESCOM, their transmission division had not started upgrading the grid to be able to carry an extra 300 megawatts of power. So we are sitting with about 167 megawatts of power, which we can't use, and yet we've got a crisis. Now, when you look at the entire value chain, you see that there was poor planning, lack of coordination, procrastination. That's at times the unifying theme of those that want to frustrate government programs. So the response to that was the president creating this ministry, which I'm privileged to head. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to harmonize and coordinate policy formulation, implementation of projects, and just making sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So we are aware of those challenges and we are responding to those challenges. Previously, the president created the position of Special Assistant to the President, Project Implementation and Monitoring. And again, I was privileged to head that office. And we managed to move a lot of projects to completion stage, such that it even made it very easy for us to actually win elections, because what the president was doing was he would start by commissioning a project, then he addresses a rally and he points at that project. So he was called Mr. Walk the Talk. So we're doing quite a lot to make sure that we respond to those challenges that are being pointed out. The Kafue Lower Gorge is now on board. The tender was awarded. Again, the Chinese tried to frustrate it by taking each other to court. But we spoke to them because we are both state-owned Chinese companies. And so Sino Hydro is the one that is developing that project. Thank
you. We've been talking about regional integration. This is a question that's come from the floor, actually. And you've mentioned China twice today and their potential jumping in ahead of us as a region. And the question that's being asked is, why aren't we working faster as a region? And you financiers actually working to make sure that this investment happens quicker in the region so that we don't get beaten to the race by the likes of China. Mr. Financiers.
Well, I think it's a number of issues or challenges that you are faced with to deal with that question head on. One of them is the fluid environment in the markets in which we work. That is increasingly getting very difficult. In the light of the problems that the minister was talking about. So increasingly, as development finance institutions, we are pushed to come up with solutions that are creative, that are more adaptive and reflective of the conditions in which we work. Fortunately for us, since we've worked in the sub-region for 20 years, so we're alive to the problems that the minister is talking about. We're involved in that project at the early stage of its development. China beats us in one thing: it has a muscle in terms of financing some of the things that we cannot get to on time, including getting into areas where we haven't done a lot of putting development finance into, where they will take the space and develop the project themselves and take it all the way up to its completion. This is a space that we have come into in the past few years as a Development Bank of Southern Africa, because we've recognized, whether you're looking at the master plans of the RECs, the regional economic communities, or you're looking at the program for infrastructure development of the AU in terms of the project lists, what you find there are projects that are in the main, the majority, over 80% of them, are not bankable. There are projects that investors cannot look at, investors will run away from. So we've created a unit working with other players, both in South Africa as well as in the rest of the region, to find ways of developing projects to bankability, so that we're able to take them quicker into the market, and we're able to get into the arenas that we're talking about. The other issues I think that we faced as a bank I think it was mentioned by the minister earlier on, is the policy certainty issue. And it's not unique to Zambia. I think it's emerging now in other markets, key markets that we're working at in Mozambique, the debt sustainability issues that are emerging there, as well as in Angola and other markets, creating difficulties again in terms of how we come in as a small development bank, focusing on infrastructure to do work in those markets. So these are challenges that are there that need a better understanding and also a better way of coming up with better solutions in terms of the problems that are there.
Yeah, thank you. I think the point that you raise is a very valid one. I think from our perspective as development finance institutions, I mean, if you compare us to commercial banks, often the feedback that we get is that we are slow and we are cumbersome, etc., etc. But that's because we have a different mandate. And we need not only to look at the financial sustainability of the project, but like Mr. Petersen said, we also need to take into account the development impacts. So is it really contributing to the economy? Is it really contributing to society? Is it in line with the environmental standards that the country is adhering to, and also international ones? But taking that into account, I think what we try to do on the FMO side is to see where we can improve ourselves. So we started with a new initiative where we try to lower the barriers in, let's say, the different stages of project development, especially also in the infrastructure energy space. So where you often can get access to grant funding for feasibility studies with one institution, but then you have to go to another institution to get funding in terms of debt and equity to really start being able to build the project, and then later on to refinance the project maybe from commercial banks. Within FMO we have now launched an initiative that combines all these three stages, and it's managed by one and the same team. So you talk to the same people who are in charge of providing grant funding for project development. Later on, when the project is deemed to be feasible, and that's proven by external advisors, that same team is looking into funding that project with debt and equity and to quite a significant level. And then later on, when the project is up and running and starts generating revenues, that same team can then also refinance the project with longer term funding. And that those three stages in the project cycle are then funded by different investors. So often you have the grant funding coming from the governments. So FMO is discussing with governments whether they could use some of the aid budget to put it into the project development stage. The construction finance is then funded for by development finance institutions, including FMO itself. And then later on, when the project is proven feasible and generating revenues, then we talk to commercial banks and institutional investors who want to have a piece of the pie in an up and running and healthy performing infrastructure energy project. So that's one of the initiatives that we are embarking on to lower the barriers.
Our inability to apply insightful thought in policy formulation has robbed us that beneficiation that should come out of tourism. Tourism is one of those sectors which is cross-cutting, and in fact its impact is very, very difficult to measure. But I must mention here that for all the tourists who come to Zambia, the wealth that is created out of that is not vested in the Zambian economy, because you've got a lot of foreigners owning the tourist assets, and they advertise the packages here in South Africa, in UK and elsewhere, and the payments for the packages are made in those economies, and the tourists just fly into Zambia. And what those outfits do is, the only amount of money that would come in is where they have a shortfall in terms of operational funding. Otherwise, they use local tourists to raise the money for their operations. meaning that we would encourage funders to look at creating financial products for local people there. And again, when I say local people, I'm not discriminating against foreigners. Local people means indigenous people and any foreigner who has decided to settle in that area. So there should be some financial products that you can create to empower the local people to own the assets in tourism. Because if you're talking about contributing towards employment creation, wealth retention in a particular economy, then it's very, very important that beyond just foreign investors who are based elsewhere and they've got an asset there, we need to also look at how we can give capacity to local people to own the assets, so that wealth retention through enhanced wealth ownership by the local people is promoted. Now, let me just say this. One of the challenges that growth of tourism faced in Zambia was this lack of approach in terms of development. We, for instance, my ministry, the moment I was appointed, we did a simple exercise of mapping out Zambia in terms of agriculture potential, mining potential, and tourism potential. And then on that map, we superimposed the master plan for the road infrastructure. We were shocked to realize that we were building roads where these roads were not assisting the growth of tourism, growth of agriculture, and that kind of stuff. So we did a realignment to make sure that if we are constructing a road, then it's a road that goes towards promotion of economic diversification. So we haven't realized that low-lying fruit because of uncoordinated planning.
We're actually looking at projects at the moment in the tourism industry. We look at it a little differently in the sense that we want to look at tourism from a business perspective. So it's what business, hotels, and that kind of thing. But that's not the only sector. And I think what is critical and what the minister actually alluded to is this integrated approach. I think that's quite important, and across the sectors as well. I mean, we've invested about $85 million in Zambia. We have an exposure of $85 million as we speak. And that's across power, it's across chemicals, agro industries, and Mamba Collieries is one of them. And what we find is that this integration idea, this thing about, let's not build a road for the sake of building a road. We've got to make sure that the infrastructure, when we're talking about infrastructure, we've got to make sure that there's economic purpose behind it. Because we've had this case before where we were looking at a hotel, and the first question we ask is, so what does the road look like to the hotel? And the answer was terrible. So it's about looking at that integrated development approach. So when you look at a project, I mean, today, somebody spoke about it. There's no such thing as a mining project any longer. It can't be called a mining project. It's a logistics project. If you can't get the product to market, then it means nothing. So, and certainly again from experience, and I'm not just saying this because Zambia is one of our biggest exposures, but certainly working with Zambia for many, many years, the one thing that I always walk away with is there are challenges, but in the case of Zambia, and I think this is, for me, this makes more sense, is in the case of Zambia, those challenges are solvable. So if you're going in there as a big business, as a small business, without exception, the people that I've dealt with in putting up actual projects, they always come back and they're complaining about frustrations, but 2 months later they solve it.
When there are needs for upgrading skills and experience within companies that we finance, we provide funding to train staff of those companies. In terms of providing funding to schools, universities, etc. Again, that's a more mandate issue. So our focus is most very much on the private sector. What we do recognize is that there's increasing appetite and drive from the private sector, especially the South African private sector, in entering the education market in the surrounding countries and the continent. And we are in talks with some of them to see whether we can support expansion into the rest of Africa. But it's still early days, but we fully recognize the potential as well as the need, because when we talk to our clients in Zambia, I mean the number one thing that they often mention as the challenge that they faced with in their business is to find the right people. So that's definitely a spot-on assessment from your side.
So the way we incorporate education is through our projects themselves, that they ensure that they have an education plan to train people, to train local people as well. The other thing that I just wanted to say was, in terms again of the IDC, one thing that we're quite keen on is also about local ownership. In fact, when a project gets evaluated, one of the criteria is local ownership. And when I say local, I mean Zambians. There has to be an element of local ownership in the project, and that's quite critical for us as well. Yeah, in terms of education, it's not a complete answer, but that's kind of how we get involved. Just as a ending comment, I suppose. I think, I've been working throughout the continent for many years, and the one thing that, and somebody said it earlier on, that we're falling behind. And it brought to mind a proverb that I will share with you, and I'll just say it, and you can think about it yourself. It's an African proverb, and it says, every morning in Africa, a springbok wakes up, and it knows that it's got to run faster than the slowest lion. Otherwise, it's going to be eaten. Similarly, every morning in Africa, a lion wakes up, and it knows it's got to run faster than the slowest springbok. Right? Otherwise, it will starve. Either way, whether you're a lion or a springbok, you've got to wake up running.
We're working very closely with ZESCO, Zambian Development Bank, and in that way, we transfer skills to each other in terms of those partnerships. Regional integration, in our view, will be achieved in another way by making sure that we maximize our capacity to develop infrastructure connectivities between countries in the sub-region. And by the time we realize, we would have had trade relations connected in a better way, moving to higher levels of customs union connection and other levels of higher integration. Without infrastructure that will facilitate the movement of goods, services, and people, and transport corridors and borders, which is one thing that we are doing very well, also working with the Japanese International Cooperation Agency as well as with the Chinese. In fact, we financed the Kasumbalesa border post in Zambia at the border with DRC. All of those things are things that we're looking at to achieve regional integration.
We have, at the moment, a president who has pushed like no other president that we've ever had in terms of driving the oil and gas exploration. He has made several statements, and as a country we've been moving, and we are moving in that direction. So we would like to invite you to come and participate in the exploration of oil and gas in Zambia. There are some blocks that have already been identified with very interesting results. Some local people have got licenses, so you can partner with them. It's a good opportunity that is lying there. Obviously, what that is going to do is that it is going to lead to a requirement for expanding refinery capacities, so that opportunity can be anticipated. And of course, evacuating the hydrocarbons, meaning that you're going to look for pipelines and further downstream an increase in the footprint of petrol stations. So there are a lot of opportunities around that. And in my closing remarks, I just want to go back to electricity, where there is an urgent need for rapid deployment of systems that can generate electricity, such as the biomass, your geothermal, and other systems. Solar is good, but because of its intermittency and grid connectivity challenges. So there are other also better formats of energy systems that you can focus on, and they are readily available, which can be co-located. You can do modular plants, 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt, up to 50 megawatts, including the portable hydro power plants. Thank you so much.
In terms of scaffolding, you need to do your market research and probably look at going beyond Zambia. You know, you stay in Zambia, but you grow your export market into Congo, DRC, Malawi, and that kind of stuff. And I'm sure they are all using trees for scaffolding. Now, you have an opportunity actually to be funded through one of the private sector World Bank windows. We were in Washington a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned about opportunities in funding entrepreneurship that is focused on assisting in issues of climate change, adaptation and mitigation. And I think this idea can actually receive some favorable attention from that World Bank facility. On the land issue, yes, you are right. A lot of land in Zambia has been held for several years for speculative purposes by people, but you can't blame them. I mean, we are talking about a spillover city growing Lusaka towards Kafue, and I don't see anybody rushing for land there. So clever ones who go and buy hundreds or thousands of hectares of land, and now when you want to put up anything, you'll have to buy it from them. And the Zambian law protects you once you have a property. We are very, very strong on respect for property rights. So, but in terms of accountability, I know that our fiscus is losing a lot of money. There's an opportunity to collect quite a lot of taxes, rates and taxes on the land that is held on title. And we're not doing that because we don't have a very, very dedicated system and an accountable record-keeping arrangement. And what we've done is that the World Bank has offered actually to assist us with experts, the same experts that assisted Rwanda to account for all the titles and for all its land. And we'll be doing that. We'll also become strict on the law that does not allow you to hold land beyond 18 months without developing it. Support to SMEs. We've paid quite a lot of lip service to this over the years, but now we're beginning to take advantage of assistance which multilateral organizations have brought to us in terms of creating incubators for SMEs to grow and reach a stage where they'll be able to stand on their own. Yes, I know that you can't start an energy project out of your own pocket. You are likely to access financial institutions, and usually financial institutions would want you to have a power purchase agreement in place more often than not with a utility company or a particular client who is likely to use your power for a very, very long time. And also some go beyond that and request for a sovereign guarantee, and on the back of that they access funding. Mamba Collieries is one of those which is enjoying a sovereign guarantee and also a power purchase agreement between themselves and ZESCO. And so they are assured that that power will be evacuated and be paid for at a particular agreed tariff, which will create the cash flows to repay the loans. Yes, it's possible. It's a matter of how you package your project and the responses that would come from those that are going to fund your project. So really, that's a business arrangement. But our doors are open. We do issue sovereign guarantees where we feel that a particular project is critical to our national building. My closing remarks. First, I'd like to start by thanking the embassy, in particular High Commissioner Emmanuel Mwamba and his staff for this kind of initiative. I don't think we have any other embassy, the Zambian embassy anywhere else, which is demonstrating this clarity of thought and initiative. That's quite impressive. I'll make sure that over a cup of tea, I mentioned that to the president. Secondly, I wish to thank the South African government, which owns the development finance institutions here present, for having a very, very unique both legislative and operating mandate, where, for instance, DBSA is allowed to put aside 30% of its portfolio to lending into the sub-region. And also IDC have got quite some free space to lend into the rest of Africa in order to build Africa alongside the developments here in South Africa. And I must say that Zambia needs South Africa, and South Africa needs Zambia, as well as the sub-region. And a good example is during the financial crisis of 2008. You saw the platinum industry, the gold industry, and that kind of stuff just went down. There were no imports in that sector. But the South African economy was actually sustained by the regional economies. And even when you look at South Africa's size of the tourists that come into South Africa, the bigger chunk of it are not even the Europeans or Americans who come here, no. It's the cross-border traders who come here every day. They stay for 2, 3, 4 days, they go back. Those are the people that are actually sustaining that sector, meaning that South Africa, the South African government needs to continue with this positive attitude towards the rest of Africa. The government does participate in ensuring that conflict is dealt with in the rest of Africa. That's quite commendable, and I wish to commend your continued presence into Africa. I just want to say, as you go into Africa to lend, for instance, into the SMEs, you need to make sure that you package that funding with Credit Plus, where you also have a portion to make sure that you hold the hand of the borrowers, so that you also reduce your non-performing loans. And also to the business community, I must tell you that there are opportunities that are begging in the rest of Africa, Zambia in particular. There are a lot of opportunities. We are at the moment restructuring our economy to make sure that we grow these other sectors to be the biggest contributors to our GDP. And I'm talking about agriculture and also tourism. In agriculture, there's quite a lot of potential in the agro industry sector. Tourism also, we are constructing the bottom road that will run along the Zambezi River from near Chirundu, talking about Sinazongwe, right through up to Livingstone. And the idea is to counter the competition from the other side of the border. So there are opportunities for you to come in and take advantage